Hi everyone, this is Ashwin from the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. Welcome to another episode of 60 Days, 60 Voices, where we speak to influencers, stakeholders, organizations working with small businesses, and part of the small business ecosystem. As you know, COVID is quite an unprecedented crisis, and really what we want to make sure from through these conversations is that organizations learn from each other. This becomes a starting point for co-creation and collaboration. And really, we ultimately, I think, as much as we can work together so that we can solve this crisis in a way that is more meaningful and puts our best foot forward. Came itself as an alliance came about because efforts were quite siloed and individualistic, and really we want to make sure that in this crisis we are moving towards a new normal as an ecosystem. Today's conversation is with Shailesh. Shailesh is from Gromor Finance, an NBFC that is trying to help small businesses, mom and pop stores, franchisees, and so on and so forth with credit. As many of you might know, the kind of mainstream of financial or financing in India is often unable to serve these segments because they're considered thin file segments, because they're considered risky, because they're considered expensive to serve. And Grover is one of those financial institutions that's really trying to solve this problem. Shailesh, really excited to have you on this conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
It's pleasure to be here, Ashwin.
Shailesh, to kick things off, would love to get a brief introduction about Gromor Finance and what kind of clients you work with. I know I spoke about it briefly, but a little bit more from you would be quite helpful.
Yeah, sure, Ashwin. So we, as a full stack tech-led NBFC, we primarily work on the supply side of economics. As you mentioned, we build variety of financial products to help small businesses meet their any working capital requirement, right? And we work with a lot of formal, informal businesses in various different segments, whether it is manufacturing, services, right from your neighborhood mechanic shop, mom and pop stores, to some of the manufacturing units, tier 3, tier 4 manufacturing units. And most of our products are unsecured business loans, providing them a longer tenure loan such that businesses can use it meaningfully in their business and be able to pay it back as well.
Great. And since you do work with a lot of different entrepreneurs on the ground, and I think the entrepreneurs that we often don't hear about in the news or don't often see kind of interviewed by mainstream media, could you tell us a little bit about what kind of challenges are they going through this crisis? What are you hearing from the ground on the key pain points?
Yeah, so I think as we work with the small businesses in many territories, I think we have a bird's eye view of what really is happening on the ground, and definitely is nothing short of a pandemic, right? I mean, while COVID is a health pandemic, there is another pandemic brewing in the lives of these small businesses, and we see multiple problems there. Certainly, it all started with the lockdown, which is completely collapsing the demand and any kind of cash flow, uh, wherein they had to kind of tap into their reserves, and many of businesses don't necessarily have these reserves, right? They have a cash flow cycle of at best 15 days, 10 days, and in a best case, probably 30 days. So immediate impact was, how do we manage expenses? Our orders are stuck. The supply chain is completely disrupted. My money is locked in, but still I have to keep incurring all these expenses, which is about the rent I have to pay, the salary I have to pay. I have to manage my own livelihood and everything of that sort, right? So the biggest challenge what they have is this cash flow situation, the liquidity situation with the businesses. Of course, there are other challenges now we are starting to see is about general fear, right? And fear about their health and safety. When will this demand come back? Is it safe to go out and do business there, even though lockdown is being withdrawn? So, and many of these guys don't have any kind of safety net with respect to their health as well. Insurance is not there. They don't have any, and I think any kind of health event is good enough to put them back into poverty, right? So they are very concerned about that. The other thing, what is happening is that this whole reverse migration, which is starting to impact them, not just with respect to uh, the people who used to work from them are no more there, even though the lockdown is being removed in a phase-wise manner. Many of the people we work with are solopreneurs, right? And they are also people who have come with their dreams to big cities like Bangalore, Pune, Indore, Bhopal to make a livelihood and have been working in this place for years together, but they are not necessarily a permanent resident of that place. And many of those guys have gone back. And now they are really, really wondering whether it is the right time to come back and start the business. So this entire migration also has impacted the entire economic activity in this space. So just to kind of summarize, the biggest challenge what they have right now is liquidity, and and they don't know how long and how much liquidity they would need, because really it's not clear to anybody that when that demand is going to return, right? And how when and how they can come back and how they can function in a way that their safety and health is taken care of, right? We see another kind of problem, just to kind of touch upon the informal segment particularly. I think uh, for the lack of any standard policies and practices, even as when lockdown is getting reduced, they are kind of subjected to a lot of local interpretation of relaxations, and there is a lot of questioning by municipal authorities and the police and the neighborhood. So that is another kind of challenge we started to see these businesses are facing. I mean, this is like a recent thing. When the lockdown is removed, we see some of our businesses not able to function just because there is no clarity about when we say relaxation norms, what does that really mean, right? So I mean, problems on all sides, Ashwin, just to say in brief.
So, Shailesh, you talked about liquidity. You talked about kind of the uncertainty around demand and uncertainty around revenue. Also, migration and the uncertainty around labor and really coming back and restarting business, and finally around the environment, the business environment in which they're operating. And that is almost from the inspectors and the local government and municipalities is almost, I guess, doubts on how do you interpret or how do you really implement new guidelines that are coming out around.
Right. Right.
I want to pick up the some of these threads, I guess, on obviously the uncertainty piece is something around mentorship and advice, and talking to entrepreneurs and helping them think through this crisis in different scenarios. Liquidity is obviously about money. So I want to understand what are the financial, non-financial efforts that Gromor as an organization is trying to make to help these entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so I think the liquidity is the most crucial piece what they would need right now. While nobody knows that when demand is going to come back, but they will need to kind of show up every day, open their shops, take out their cards, go and do business in a most safe and secure way. But for that period, they will need some kind of support. It's really not possible to conduct a business and keep incurring cost and not have any kind of revenue, right? So that is where I think we need some kind of a Kickstarter product for them, wherein there is some amount of liquidity available to tide over this next 3 to 6 months, wherein they don't have to worry about their expenses. Of course, they have to conserve as much as cash possible, but they should be able to, keep operating their business as usual. And hopefully, with time, the demand will return and their chance of survival will be very high. So to that effect, we are actively working on creating such a product, wherein there is it's a Kickstarter product. It's basically a unsecured loan, wherein depending on their business expenses, they will get a sizable amount, which they can use to incur all expenses around rent and buying stock and paying their people and all other livelihood expenses as well. It will also have a built-in moratorium so that they don't feel the pinch of repayment as they start this loan. So there will be a built-in moratorium of 2-3 months so that they have a sufficient time to generate revenue out of their business. And then there is a sufficient runway. So probably 12 months beyond that is what they have to pay back. so that any kind of uncertainty regarding when the business is going to come back in a full swing can be adjusted. So we have conceptualized this product. We are in the active discussions with a lot of partners that how do we take it to the right beneficiaries and help them. We do believe that such kind of intervention will improve the survival rate of businesses in the course of this pandemic significantly. Secondly, we have our own existing customers, and we realize that they are also facing the hardship with respect to liquidity, demand not being in there and all that. So for them also, depending on what kind of industry they belong, what kind of expenses they have, we are coming up with a very customized product so that we can provide them that additional liquidity so that they come out on the other side hale and hearty, and we continue to service them for the long term, right? So really, in one word, I think how do we address their liquidity, but in a way that it aligns with this time, provides them sufficient runway, provides them sufficient moratorium of sort, so that they can use money, but then have a sufficient time to pay it back as well.
Shailesh, as you know, Game is also trying to do a kind of a liquidity fund almost, which along all of the principles that you talked about, right? Really, how do we help businesses survive in the short to medium term? How do we provide them unsecured loans that allows them to kickstart their business and really pay some of these dues, ensure that labor doesn't go without salaries for the next 2 months, 3 months, so on and so forth. Obviously, the government has announced, or the RBI in particular has announced liquidity measures targeting small and medium-sized NBFCs very recently, I think about 10 days ago. And we've seen that there is amongst banks at least a flight to safety, which has not translated, which has not led to liquidity translating into money or loans for these smaller enterprises. That is a lot of the small and medium-sized NBFCs. So I wanted to ask you, from the government's point of view, how do we make sure this happens? How do we make sure that the announcements almost translate into money on the ground for entrepreneurs? What more do we need to do?
Yeah, so I think government has announced the scheme, especially through RBI, wherein a lot more liquidity is infused into the ecosystem. By adjusting repo, reverse repo, and by conducting some TLTRO kind of auctions. And I think that is well intentioned as far as RBI is concerned, but RBI being a regulator, they are not really taking the route of enforcing this. And I think that is where the transmission is not happening, right? So we could see banks are flush with capital, but at the same time, they, and probably to some extent rightly so, have a concerns about the macro and the risk associated to it, and whether it will come back to bite them in the future or not. So they have their concerns. So I think what government probably need to do is that they need to expand their delivery channels of such a intervention. They probably have to reach out to these smaller NBFCs directly, probably have a liquidity window of their own for these NBFCs, or figure out a way that banks are incentivized to provide these monies to the NBFCs. Because if you think about SME market, it is primarily, especially micro SMEs, this is primarily addressed by the small small NBFCs and not the large banks. So I feel the intervention, either there is a direct intervention from government and thereby IBI to provide a liquidity to the NBFCs, or there has to be some kind of enforcement measures, or rather encouragement or some kind of incentives for banks, additional incentives for banks to ensure the transmission of money provision for small NBFCs and thereby these small businesses. In addition to that, I feel government should come up with a package, the way they have done it through a direct benefit transfer and all that, should come up with a package of own for these micro SME businesses, wherein depending on certain criteria, right, there are various means of doing, applying that criteria, whether it is a EPFO contribution done by the small businesses, whether it is GST contribution done by small businesses. So probably using some of those benchmarks, they need to provide some liquidity directly to these businesses so that they can, sustain the employee force they have, make sure there is no unemployment situation get created, make sure that they continue to sustain their business and don't perish, right? So I think that measure is also critically required. Even that measure should come up with a rider that how do we achieve the transmission, right? It shouldn't be that companies get the capital from government and do not, spend it forward. So I think there is a direct intervention package is also required for the small businesses, which is, I think there is a lot of rumor that it is in the making,
Right.
but I think we are losing time. We are losing time in a big way, and I think we needed it as of yesterday.
Yeah, and in a recent 60 Day 60 Voices conversation with Amit Basole from Azim University, we were talking about the segments of these different uh, of the entrepreneur landscape in India, and really what we identified was there are a set of nano entrepreneurs who really
Right.
require who are family or individual businesses who probably require some form of extremely soft loans or grants or direct cash transfers.
Right.
There are kind of the informal micro entrepreneurs who are extremely hard to reach, and we were unable to, figure out too many ways in which we could reach them, because I think this informality problem is a big one for India. It's a real structural fault. And then you have the formal MSMEs who are connected to NBFCs, who are connected to some banks in some cases. And there the credit mechanism really makes sense. But Shailesh, to you, if a large swath of micro entrepreneurs are informal, are there really ways that we can reach them that can help meaningfully kind of help them survive? Or can we also use this opportunity to formalize, bring them in the mainstream fold, really emphasize the importance of being part of the system?
Absolutely. I think there are ways, and I think I must mention a game in particular as one of the channel, right? So I think you would be surprised to know that how dense the not-for-profit NGO kind of organizations what we have, right? Whether it was about feeding people during the lockdown to now helping these small informal nano entrepreneurs to make sure their livelihood needs are met. Everywhere we have a dense network of all these NGOs, right? And I think game through building a consortium of these NGOs, I think I see that one of the channel. And in fact, just to kind of add to our earlier effort, I was mentioning about the Kickstarter loan. Even in that loan, our access to market or a last mile delivery, we realize can only be facilitated by such a non-government organizations. And we are in that, for that, we are looking forward to really work with GAME as well as other foundations under GAME's purview, which are Deyasra, Udyam, and I'm sure there is a long list of such NGOs which have a direct access to business, understand these nano entrepreneurs' requirements, can provide that last mile delivery, identification, so that kind of problem can be very easily solved. You are very right. Government on their own do not have the way probably they have a DBT scheme using Aadhaar and stuff like that for a below poverty population. For these nanometers, they don't have their own channel. But I do believe that leveraging the efforts of game-like organization, they can build such a channel and provide very timely intervention. So that's one of the way government should function.
Oh yeah, I think the importance of partnering with organizations that have feet on the ground,
Yeah.
are reaching out to these traditionally remote, difficult to serve populations, but also enterprises in our conversation, in our context is crucial, and that's something that has been repeatedly emphasized in our conversations. In fact, yesterday I was part of a panel where someone spoke about how the accountant network in India is extremely vast, and many MSMEs use, accountants who are often not qualified accountants, but they're working under a chartered accountant, and they're really trusted advisors of these MSMEs. And can we use that mechanism to reach many MSMEs about information around schemes, information around loans that are available from NBFCs like yourself, and so tapping into these informal channels that exist and that are trusted will be extremely crucial. To close, Shailesh, I wanted to get you to speak directly to the ecosystem from this platform, and really, if there is partnerships that Gromor is looking at, or if there is any message on how we should think about this crisis and how we should think about this crisis as an ecosystem that you'd like to communicate to all of us. Love to hear that from you.
Absolutely. This is a unprecedented situation. I think we have never seen, and I hope we will never see such a situation again. And response to this cannot be in silos. So the importance of ecosystem, the partnerships, that whole collaborative camaraderie is, I think, is extremely vital. So as a financial services industry, I think, and one of the representative of that, what we could bring on table is our wherewithal with respect to technology, people, process, so that this intervention can be done in a very systematic as well as the scaled way. So what we are typically looking for are, the on-field partners with respect to NGOs on one side, and I think the entire collaborative effort what we are doing around for that with GAME and Deyasra Foundation and Udyam and few other organizations is going to be extremely vital. That is more on the delivery side, identification of beneficiary, making sure they get timely help. And on the other side, we are looking for, people, like-minded organizations and people who can again collaborate, whether it is with respect to providing capital or for forward lending, whether with respect to providing some kind of a guarantee pool, whether it's with respect to providing certain services like insurance, which can be built with it. So we are trying to collaborate with some of the insurance partners. We are trying to collaborate with some of the payment gateway, payment companies, so that the entire thing can be implemented digitally. Because just as a side note, this is a great opportunity to drive towards formalization, right? So probably build that new ways of doing business right away.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think there has to be a massive collaboration across all these organizations, and we as a financial services companies are open to partner with NGOs to help us do the last mile delivery, open to partner with other banks and NBFCs and other institutions, so that we can use this or the foundations and trust, so that we can use this capital in a much more meaningful, transparent way, and some other services, so that we can improve this ease of doing business and set some new standards with respect to formalization. So massive challenge, but at the same time I think there is a opportunity to lay down certain fundamentals which are going to be extremely productive in years to come for the small and micro businesses in India.
Thank you so much, Shailesh, for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ashwin.